For Syria, it means, in the first place, having a package in place to to help the refugees and to help the host countries there. Of course, the situation in Syria hasn't become easier ever since Russia became militarily involved in supporting the Assad regime, not just to help against the Islamic radicals of ISIL, but in the first place to help the regime itself. This brings me to external challenge number 2, which is Russia. It may have disappeared from the front pages, but of course the conflict in Ukraine is still burning and the ceasefire is violated every day. Russia has undermined the sovereignty of Ukraine by its illegal annexation of Crimea and its central role in the ongoing conflict. But more in general, we are faced with some would call it assertive, we would call it aggressive Russia, trying to push the boundary of the acceptable. It has violated rules and regulations of international law and behavior. In Crimea, we see regular reports about Russian airplanes buzzing, as it is called, NATO airplanes and NATO warships. There is a war of words developing with regard to the Baltic states. In particular, Estonia and Latvia have sizable Russian-speaking populations, which may be used as a pretext, who knows, by Russia to get more involved. We've seen a similar model developing in Ukraine. The difficult and dangerous thing there is, of course, that those 3 Baltic states are not just members of the EU, but of NATO as well. And now the military aspect comes into play. You know, Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty states that an attack on one will be treated as an attack on all. And what constitutes an attack is, after Ukraine, a bit up in the air. But I think that the model as was followed in Ukraine would, by us, be considered as an attack. We don't want to go there. We don't want a cold war, we don't want a hot war. But right now we see a development which is quite disconcerting. So it's important for us on the western side of Europe, and that includes almost all of Europe. Our the Polish ambassador will be speaking here as well, and he'll have a lot more to say about this. We need to draw a line in the sand, if you will. We have to make clear, and that's what we're doing, that enough is enough, that Russia cannot go on just acting as if it were the new superpower in Europe. Part of that line consists of EU sanctions. Ever since the occupation of Crimea, we've stopped summit meetings with the Russians, both at the European level and at the national level. There are economic sanctions in place. To summarize it, it's more complicated than that, but we don't do business with Crimea. A number of persons and businesses and institutions within Russia and the Ukraine are cut off from doing business and getting finance from the European Union. And this way we're trying to put pressure on the regime and on the supporting circles around the regime to tell them enough is enough. There is a cost involved if you behave like you do. There's one other thing which is more of an internal nature, if you will. So far, at least we the Dutch have not really been satisfied with the state of European foreign policy. There is a lack of clarity with regard to our objectives, or common European objectives, and the exact nature of our foreign policy. And that's why we are very supportive of the fact that High Representative Mogherini has engaged in drawing up a global strategy which looks at security and defense, counter-terrorism and organized crime, cyber security, energy and climate, and yes, migration and mobility as well. So we have a wide variety of items, themes, subjects, challenges that we think ought to be addressed by the European Union as a whole. And we're looking forward to High Representative Mogherini's strategy when it will be presented to the European Council in June. Part of the development of this strategy is what you in New Zealand would call a public consultation. So the public, including institutions, are invited to comment, to give their contribution to this. I mentioned migration and mobility. I referred to the flow of refugees from Syria before. This has been quite a tortuous process for us. We were quite honestly overwhelmed by the development, by the size of the flows coming to us. But after lengthy discussions and negotiations, we, the Dutch presidency, are cautiously optimistic that we've reached a common approach and that we've established an agreement with Turkey which will allow us to deal with the issue in, on the one hand, an effective way, keeping an unrestricted flow of refugees from coming to Europe, and on the other hand, maintaining minimum humanitarian and human rights standards in dealing with those refugees. We support the countries in the neighborhood, which have the vast majority of refugees, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan. We support Greece, and we have the arrangement with Turkey about taking back illegal, if you will, refugees. It's not an ideal situation that we're in, but for now we have to take these measures to get a grip on it. These external challenges require the European Union to be united internally, and it means we'll have to work very hard to get to that particular point. What is needed are confidence in our ability to confront and overcome these issues. We need cohesion in our European approach to finding solutions, and I will return to that, a strong connection with European citizens. These are the 3 C's that I mentioned earlier, and they are top priorities for us. The presidency of the European Union used to be very much an agenda-setting position, but since since Lisbon, I don't know why I say Lebanon, perhaps I'm too focused on the issues in the Middle East. Since Lisbon, that has changed. Nowadays, the presidency is much more of a facilitator of the process, someone who makes sure that the agenda as it exists is being pushed forward. But crucially, the European presidency has to be an honest broker. A facilitator, someone who tries to bridge differences between member states, between European institutions and member states. That's the way we see our position, an activist one, in making sure that the process yields the right results. Citizens is one of the 3 C's that I mentioned. Everybody who reads the international press, who reads European press, British press, if you will see that there is has been a growing criticism amongst European populations of the way things are going. It's not just EU. There is a discomfort and criticism of national governments as well. And one of the results of that development in public opinion is a rise of what you might call populist parties. Almost every European country has one. Parties who are against foreign, as they call it, influence, against foreign immigration, who are often nationalists, want to reassert the position of the national state. In a number of instances, that means leaving the European Union, not just UKIP in the UK, but in other European countries you have the same. In my country too, there is a movement, if you will, against membership of the Netherlands of the European Union, and they see the challenges which I just mentioned as one of the main reasons to be critical of national governments and of the European Union. Very often the only solution they offer is leaving the EU, doing something against Brussels. It's not a positive agenda that's being put forward, but it does resonate with large chunks of the electorate in many European countries. And we have to deal with that. Whether we agree with their analyses or not, it is a political fact that our governments have to deal with.